Here's a more conversational version of the story in English. This story was told to me by a firefighter who used to help out at a training center. The gist of it is about rescuing a kid from a big tree. When he first got the call, he didn't really know what was going on. All he knew was that the search and rescue team didn't have the right gear to climb such a big tree, so they needed his help. Now, this tree was so huge that even the rescue team wasn't confident about climbing it safely. It turned out that before he became a firefighter, he was a tree trimmer. So, using some old tools, climbing that tree was a piece of cake for him. He walked about 2 miles to reach the rescue team. They were standing near the tallest trees in the area. When he arrived, they pointed to a specific tree. He laughed and asked the rescue team leader how the kid even got up there. It seemed like something out of a cat stuck in a tree story, but the leader just shook his head and told him to get the kid down. He saw something up there, so without thinking too much, he started climbing. As he climbed, he began to wonder if the rescue team was messing with him, because there was no way a kid could have climbed that tree. The tree's base was thick, but it got much thinner as he climbed. Several times, he had to go back and find a better way up because he wasn't sure if the branches could hold him. Still, he kept climbing. As he got closer to the top, he saw a splash of blue through the leaves. It looked like a piece of a child's clothing stuck in the branches. He started calling out, telling the kid to climb toward him if he could, but there was no response. When he finally reached the kid, he realized the kid wasn't going to answer. The kid was caught on a forked branch, which was probably what kept him from falling. Unfortunately, the kid was already dead. He had no idea who put the kid there or how, but it was a really twisted thing to do. The kid's intestines were hanging out of his mouth and draped over the branches like some gruesome decorations. He got closer and saw that some of the intestines were also hanging out of the kid's pants. The kid's eyes were gone, possibly because of some kind of pressure that made them pop out, and his tongue was swollen, sticking out of his mouth, covered in flies. He was so shocked that he just grabbed a branch and started poking the kid to get him down because he was too scared to touch him directly. Eventually, the body fell to the ground. He almost got fired for how he handled it, but there was no way he could have carried that kid down with his intestines all over him. He'd seen a lot of dead kids before, like the one he found in a bathtub full of boiling water during a fire. But this was different. He was terrified of touching the body. When the kid hit the ground, the rescue team didn't react. They must have known the kid was dead before sending him up there. He climbed down and confronted the team leader, asking why they made him do it if they knew the kid was dead. The leader just said it wasn't his concern, and thanked him for bringing down the evidence. The way he said evidence was weird, like the kid wasn't even a person. Then, one of the team members led him out of the forest while the leader and others stayed behind. It was all so strange. He tried asking why they made him do it, but they wouldn't say. They just called it a classified incident. When I asked him what he thought happened to the kid, he was silent for a while before saying that based on the way the intestines were out, it looked like some kind of massive pressure had sucked them out. There were no external injuries, so it wasn't like the kid was crushed. He still can't figure out what happened to this day. Here's a more conversational translation of the passage. I've got this senior from training camp who's pretty tight with me. We shared our fair share of stories and experiences in the past, so he hit me up to see if I could share some insights he had about stairs. He was glad I was sharing these stories because, you know, it's important to raise awareness about the weird stuff happening out there, especially with how tight-lipped the forestry department is about it all. I wasn't really getting what he meant, so I asked him to elaborate. Turns out, he was talking about how the media doesn't know squat about what's going on, and the forestry folks keep inviting tourists despite knowing it's not safe. He felt like these odd occurrences, though not super frequent, are on the rise in terms of casualties, which is a big deal. He was surprised I didn't mention those upside-down stairs. I had no idea what he was talking about or if he'd mentioned them before. He looked at me like he couldn't believe it. Apparently, these stairs sometimes pop up out in the wilderness, and he's run into the upside-down kind a few times. He described them like if you had a doghouse with detachable stairs, then flipped them upside down and stuck them in the woods. Pretty freaky. Hey, he doesn't see them often, but they give him the creeps. Like the aftermath of a tornado where everything's wrecked except for a few random things that survive. He finds these stairs scarier than regular ones, because they seem to mess with his head. He's not easily spooked like most of us in this line of work, but these stairs got him feeling some type of way. So, he's planning to dig deeper into it later. He also mentioned how a lot of people have run-ins with this faceless man, who harasses them. He was excited to tell me because he's had similar experiences. He recalled a training event a few years back, when he heard someone outside his tent at night. We're usually told not to wander too far. You know the drill. So, he decided to check it out, and found himself following this figure into the woods. He was half asleep and freaked out, worried someone else would end up like that guy, who almost fell off the cliff. He followed the figure down this straight path, for about a mile until they stopped at a riverbank. By the moonlight reflecting off the water, he could make out the figure. Just a regular-looking dude with something covering his face, seemingly looking his way. He asked if the guy was okay, and if he needed help, but got no response. He got closer, shining his flashlight, and realized something wasn't right. The guy was breathing, but it was like he was faking it. No real movement. Then he asked for it or something, but the guy just made this low sound. When he shined the light up, the guy had no facial features, just smooth skin. He was so spooked he almost dropped the flashlight. Suddenly, the guy was right in front of him, but it was like he hadn't moved at all. He couldn't wrap his head around it, like he moved too fast for his brain to catch up. Then the guy's throat split open, stretching into a smile, but there was no blood, just darkness. He booked it back to camp, feeling like the guy was still behind him even though he couldn't see him. He waited by the fire, watching, but nothing else happened. He knows it sounds crazy, but it really happened to him, even though it sounds like something out of a nightmare. One night, we were telling ghost stories before bedtime, mostly just to spook each other out and see who'd chicken out first. The usual targets were the newbies, who were always easy to freak out. Then this woman told a story that genuinely gave me the creeps because I knew it was real, unlike the other made-up tales. She said it happened when she was a kid, playing in the woods behind her house in southern Maine. Those woods were dense and creepy, not like the parks we patrol nowadays. We'd been warned not to venture too far, but we never knew why. It was just an unspoken rule. We used to imagine all sorts of things in there, like bears the size of houses. One summer, after a series of hurricanes, the woods were wrecked, and a fire broke out not far from her house. When the firefighters came back, some of them seemed different, like they'd been through hell. They looked shell-shocked, like they'd seen things they couldn't forget. Most of the townsfolk left after that, and when she asked her parents what happened, they brushed it off. So, we decided to sneak into the woods after everyone said it was safe. We found burnt trees and even a deer carcass. My friend wanted to bury it, but I stopped him because its antlers looked weird. We kept going deeper until it felt like we were on another planet, surrounded by blackened trees. Suddenly, we heard someone shouting nearby, and I panicked, thinking it was my dad coming to drag me home. My friend hid behind a rock because he wasn't supposed to be there. As the voice got closer, I realized it was calling for help. It turned out to be a guy with no nose or lips, just smooth skin, bleeding like crazy. He grabbed my shoulder, and I stumbled back, terrified. He kept babbling about how long he'd been missing and where his colleagues were. I didn't understand half of what he said, but I tried to help him with my first aid kit. That's when he freaked out, screaming not to touch him, and never to let him go back to that cursed place. Then he bolted, leaving me and my crying friend behind. When we got home, I told him we should never go into those woods again. We stayed friends, but we never talked about that weird guy we met that day.